Okay, hello. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ramesh Panakkal. I work for WhereScape. I'm a customer success manager looking after the EMEA region, generally looking after enterprise clients. And I was also a former customer. So to give you a brief biography of me, before my role at WhereScape, I was working for Xerox Financial Services as their risk analytics director for EMEA. And I purchased WhereScape in 2012 to help build out the European data warehouse, risk analytics data warehouse. And 5 years later, I loved the product so much, I joined the company. Moved to the dark side, as they say. So, sorry, we'll just let you come and sit down. So this afternoon we're going to be talking about executing an effective data strategy and why automation is no longer a choice. I think we all know what data is. We're all here at the convention. But why are we talking about data? So in 2017, the Economist mentioned that in an article, it talked about the world's most valuable resources no longer being oil, but data. And in that article, it listed the world's 5 most valuable firms as being Alphabet, which is Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft. Now, the comparison between oil and data is not a new one. It's been talked about in keynote speeches ever since that article came out. But as we live our lives these days, we're producing a tremendous amount of information, both commercial and personal, which is being consumed by the world. And it seems like every aspect of our lives at the moment, both professionally and personally, is being digitally consumed and analyzed. So let's think about what data actually is. I'm feeling a bit strange at the moment. I'm normally usually in front of the screen, but I'm told that I have to stand here. So let's consider you have a company. You have a business. And it has customers which transacts with you. Every transaction that you have with that customer creates a data point. You have customers that contract with you, they create orders, there are invoices, maybe some refunds and credits, and you collect customer information, okay, such as names, addresses, mailing preferences, and so on. So as you create that relationship with that customer, you're storing this information, and you're creating that database of information, which describes the relationship that you're creating with them. Now, you also have employees, so as you have, as you employ people to work for you, you also capture information about their remuneration, the number of hours that they work, the office location that they're based at, their skill set, experience, and so on. And again, you're also creating a lot more of, you're also collecting a lot of employee information, such as their names, their addresses, and so on and so forth. Now, as you go through this business creation process that you have, as your business evolves and grows, you're going to potentially create and buy supplies, goods, services, raw materials, stationery, that kind of thing. You're going to be utilizing utilities of various descriptions, so you're going to have buildings, you're going to have gas, water, electricity, and so on. And you're going to create products. So there's going to be some research and development activity potentially, there's going to be some marketing activity. And all of this information is being captured somewhere, okay? And as you capture this information, you're going to publicize it. You're going to create press releases. You're going to have your accounts published to the world. You're going to have a website, which will also be an interface with your customers potentially, and as a marketing vehicle. The media is going to play a part. You're going to have customer reviews, which are going to be posted on social media. You're going to have journalist reviews. And all this social media activity, again, creates more data points. And finally, you have your competitors. Now, they're obviously competing with you. They're creating similar or slightly better or worse products than you have, and you want to understand exactly what's going on in the marketplace. You want to understand how they're doing, and you're going to capture that information as you go. Now, this and thousands of other data points, depending on the scale of the organization, in the world of the world of large enterprise, for example, we have IoT and we have all of these other sensor information that we're collecting, billions of records of data every single day, is what we mean by data. So how do you turn that data, that information, all of those little bits of intelligence that you're collecting about your customers, your products, your competitors, your suppliers, your market environment, how do you turn that into something meaningful? So this is where a data strategy becomes very, very important. So what is a data strategy? A data strategy is where you create a common understanding of how the business is going to create value from the data that you're collecting. Creating a strategy for the business that encapsulates all of the priorities and the goals that are hardwired into that strategy. Now, in order to do that, we need to utilize all of the data assets that we have at our disposal. So that would be, all of the elements within the flow diagram that I've got up here. So data generation, data storage, governance, quality, analysis, business intelligence, and data science. And we're going to utilize all of those tools and assets at our disposal to create returns or competitive advantage for the business in support of its wider goals. Now, how you use that data in this day and age and the effectiveness with which you use that data really defines how successful a company can be. And a data strategy is not a fixed point. Okay, it's a framework that evolves with the evolution of the company. So as your company grows and your priorities change and your stakeholder values also adapt to the new and moving dynamic environment that you're working in, that strategy also has to be able to flex and adapt to be able to cope with those new priorities and understandings. But ultimately, what we're here to do is deliver value. And that's the most important thing that often gets forgotten in the implementation of a data strategy. So how do we execute on a data strategy? Now, I mentioned value just now. It's very, very important that we don't lose sight of that objective. Okay, without driving value to the business, you lose the interest of your stakeholders, and it's very easy to derail, any initiative that you might have. Now, when we look at the diagram on screen, you can see that there are lots of moving parts here. So, for example, you start with, you have product management, you've got security and privacy, data ops, data engineering, data architecture, data science, oversight, and community. And all of these moving parts have to coalesce in some way, shape, or form in the execution of this data strategy to provide something which is meaningful to the business. So how do we do this without boiling the ocean? I mean, there are a lot of different elements here, and depending on the scale of the organization, they can be very complex organisms. It's almost a little bit like having a cart with 4 horses at each corner pulling in all different directions at the same time, right? If you don't do it right. So what we tend to advocate, especially when I'm dealing with new customers and when we're dealing with new projects, is starting small. The idea is to deliver quick wins that delivers value immediately to the business, that creates an ecosystem that is manageable and is scalable. So by starting small, what we're able to do is deliver that immediate impact to the business. We're able to create a smaller set of structures where we can test the efficacy with which we're delivering on all of these elements that are on screen right now. Now, by doing that, you're creating that culture of success. You're creating a small deliverable which is pushed out to the business. The stakeholders that are involved can see the value immediately. They can start to believe in what you're trying to do, and they can start to understand the value proposition which is being presented. Now, when you're defining what a quick win actually means, the idea is to have a concept which is very easily scalable or repeatable at a later date. And the thing about quick wins and this approach is that it doesn't necessarily have to apply just to a new initiative. If you're trying to reinvigorate your existing data initiative, you can do the same thing. Now, I talk about scaling, and what do I mean by that? There are two ways of scaling. You can either scale up or you can scale out. Now, scaling up is replication. So let's say, for example, you have a data pipeline, you have a particular project. I'm going to use an example of, let's say we think about a petrol station, okay? So with a petrol station, you have various elements. You've got, you're selling petrol, and you've got your shop, okay? So maybe my initial data project is to analyze and create information or collect information about my petrol sales. Okay, so I create my pipeline for petrol sales, and I have my reporting, I have all of the various elements, I've got my development team, I've got my stakeholders, they're getting their reports, they're very happy. Successful project, quick win, done. Now, I don't just have one petrol station, I've got 15 of these things, okay? So now that I've delivered my first set of reports around this particular petrol station, I can then think about, well, either I can replicate that and I can install that at all of my other 15 petrol stations and do the same thing, or I can start to scale out. Now, I don't just sell petrol at my petrol station, I have other goods and services that I provide in the shop, right? So once I have a successful strategy or a successful implementation in one place, I can then start to apply the same principles elsewhere. So scaling up would be the replication of my existing project into other petrol stations. Scaling out would be to include the shop. And there are certain things that we have to consider when we're scaling out. Obviously, they're not going to be exactly the same data model. They're going to have different priorities and those kind of things. So there might be a little bit more analysis involved in being able to do that. But again, if you do it small and you start to replicate, we see a culture of success starting to develop. So once we've decided exactly what this data strategy needs to encapsulate, how do we deliver that? Well, I think if I'm going to speak from experience, when I was at Xerox, we had nothing. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you. I'm just going to ignore the slides for the moment. So when I was at Xerox, we started with nothing. We had spreadsheets that we were collecting for a $2 billion leasing portfolio across 14 countries, and we were doing it all with Excel spreadsheets. And it was an absolute nightmare. Come month end, I was collecting information from all of these countries. It was all in different formats, and it was all various different definitions, and the same field might have been used, but it meant something completely different in France as it did in Germany. We had different accounting standards that we had to allow for. We had different regulatory perspectives that we had to take into account. We had all of these various little quirky behaviors that we then had to allow for when we were trying to consolidate and get a reasonably decent position on what the portfolio was doing, how revenue was coming in, what the costs were, what the risk was, etc., etc. So, this is the quick win, start small and scale strategy was pretty much what we did. We took one of our portfolios, we decided that we were going to have one data source that we were going to pull in. We were going to go end to end. We weren't going to do everything. We picked a particular portfolio data flow where we looked at the runoff of that particular portfolio, and we decided, okay, so we've got new contracts starting, we have contracts running off, that's throwing out some revenue. Let's work on that first. So we did that because that was the most easily benchmarked set of metrics that we could use that we could then apply across the board to all of the other countries that we had. Now, once we started to do that and we started to see success and we started to see the ease with which we could deploy that set of analysis out to each country, we started to gain some interest. We started to get better results in terms of understanding how our revenue was being generated. We started to understand where definitions weren't quite right as well. So, where we weren't quite reporting things properly, and we weren't getting as many surprises at the end of the month as a result. It allowed us to then think about scaling out. Okay, so once we had that portfolio view, moving into dealing with the cash flow side of things and invoicing, collections, and how risk was then being applied to the portfolio, bad debt, losses, and so on and so forth, gave us an idea of the cost base that we were starting to have to manage. And again, when you're dealing with that many countries and you're dealing with that sort of complexity of structure, you have a lot of politics that come into play. And if you're able to deliver things that, or intelligent artifacts that people can get their heads around and agree on, you start to actually erode the political bedrock of the argument. Now, what I found was that automation was very, very critical in order to be able to do that. So for me, speed was key. I had 14 different finance managers, 14 different risk managers, one big boss who was an American guy. He wasn't very, he didn't suffer fools gladly. So if you got your numbers wrong, you were in real trouble. And, trying to get all of these guys around the table, again, it was like wild horses pulling in different directions with a chariot in between. So what we managed to do, we bought WhereScape in, and we started to prototype. Now, usually with data projects, one of the things that hampers any progress is this idea that data comes in, end users get a report, the end users have absolutely no idea how that report was generated. They don't agree with the numbers, they don't agree with the definitions, there's no transparency, it's a bit of a black box exercise. And so you lose credibility in your project very early on. So being able to prototype with people, dragging them into the conversation, getting their understanding, being able to include them and start to bridge the gap between the business and IT, data development, data engineering, was very, very important. And I am talking about a long time ago. This was 2012. I'm showing my age a little bit. But, even back then, it was a very important criteria in being able to have a successful deployment of this particular strategy. So prototyping allowed us to create that quick win scenario and deploy it. We could then scale. Now, if I look at what I've got up here in terms of the diagram, I can't actually see very clearly, unfortunately, sorry. But we have to keep up with the demand. Okay, so as you're deploying, as you're creating these quick wins, as you're starting to engage with the rest of the business, as other stakeholders come to play, they start to see how successful you're being. They want a bit of they want to be able to share in that success. They want you to come and help them and deliver the same sort of things. So keeping up with that demand means that your team is going to start to get taxed. Okay, you're suddenly going to be presented with 5 or 6 different proposals for completely different projects, which are similar but not quite the same. And you want to be able to deliver on everything. But again, timing is important. So what does automation give you to help you with the delivery of that strategy? Well, first of all, it improves timeliness. It improves quality. It simplifies the administration of your environment. It improves governance, and it saves cost. So how do we do that? Well, the keeping up with the demand piece is probably the most critical aspect that we need to consider. And faster prototyping is a very key aspect of that. When you have low code or no code as part of that delivery mechanism, you also simplify your testing overhead, for example, which means that you can deliver faster. We have increased job satisfaction with your development teams. So the one thing that we find is with automation, for instance, we take away all of the boring, mundane sort of drudgery, or the drudge work that's associated with developing a data warehouse. So, building the select star from pieces of code that nobody really wants to get involved with. Can be templates, and those are the bits that we can automate. So by doing those boring and mundane tasks via automation, what we're able to do is allow our developers to focus on the more complex and interesting challenges that they have ahead of them. And faster results mean that you can modify, improve, and validate with less stress. And so you can massively improve productivity within your teams. Now, one thing that you will find as you go through and you develop your data warehouse is that things change. All right? So requirements are out of date as soon as you've created them. And so refactoring is often something that we have to take into account. Adapting changes to the business and the speed with which we're generating information at the moment, means that our priorities change pretty much daily. So easy refactoring and pattern-based modeling and the addition of new sources, it's a very key part of an automation tool set. The other thing that it allows you to do is be agile in the way that you model and you engineer that data. So managing risk is the next one, I think, on the bottom there. So this is something that obviously I have a great deal of experience with, but risk-based decisions always need the latest information, right? And it's fast. You need to be able to absorb credit information or risk-based information about your customers. You need to be able to throw it through a model. You need to be able to turn it around quickly, and you need to be able to test the efficacy of those models in real time almost. So otherwise, you could end up with a situation where it's costing you a lot of money because your losses go through the ceiling. So being able to absorb the latest information, if you're bringing on new sources, you're attaching yourself to new credit bureau, and they have different structures of data that they're throwing at you, for example, you need to be able to absorb that quickly, efficiently, adapt it to a new model, and push it back into the business. You need to make sure that reports are created in a timely manner, and there's no conflict around what those reports are telling you. So consistency in that delivery. And with automation, one thing that I haven't mentioned so far is the business rules that you have. So the standards that you have within your business, you know, how you describe your information, how you define what profit is, how you define what revenue represents, how you define what particular costs are consistently applied, because you're hard coding those, or you're creating the templates that structure the usage of that information. So you don't have to worry about whether or not a developer understands, in the context of Data Vault, for example, you know, what your hash key algorithm is. We automatically apply that sitting in the background. We have a reduction in errors. So where everything is templated, the system deals with it. You don't have to worry about somebody putting a semicolon in the wrong place, for instance. So you're creating a baseline benchmark for all of your coding in one place. Documentation allows for, so where we have metadata, for example, we're storing all of the attributes and artifacts and descriptions of any of the objects that you have in your data warehouse. We're able to document automatically from there. So with WhereScape, for example, as you generate your code, all of that metadata is sitting there in the background. We can generate the documentation in real time. So as things are changing, we have you know, web-based documentation that you can then push out to Confluence, or you can push out to wherever, your intranet. And we have different levels. So you can create a business glossary. So it's no longer just the purview of your development team to look at this documentation, but it then becomes a very important aspect of how your business users get to understand what those reports are telling you. And technological change, I think, is one of the last things that I think is fascinating these days, because we're now living in a world where, from an infrastructure point of view, everything is in the cloud. And as companies go through their cloud journeys, they may have attached themselves to Azure, to Microsoft, or they may have gone down the AWS route, or they're working with Google, for example. And they decide, you know, okay, so I'm currently on Azure Synapse, I'm not happy with it, maybe I want to move to Snowflake. You know, ordinarily, if you have a large, complex data warehouse environment, you know, making that migration, although it seems simple enough, is quite a time-consuming and risky affair. So what we are able to do with our metadata, because we are agnostic in our metadata, we're able to deploy that metadata via templates to new targets. So let's say, for example, you have a SQL Server on-prem data warehouse, and you want to move it to the cloud. Well, we already have the metadata around the objects that you've built, right? We just need to say, okay, well, instead of creating SQL Server code, we're going to push it out and create SnowSQL instead. So we can do that, push it out through those templates. You have those artifacts built, and then you just need to migrate the data. We did this with, we've done this a number of times with a number of different companies, and you know, we're seeing migrations in the context of weeks rather than months. So we can create very highly portable, very sustainable environments moving forward. Now, just to give you some context or scale of what we're talking about in terms of the amount of information that seems to be out there at the minute. This was a new slide that got thrown in here this morning, so I'm still a little bit unfamiliar with the terms, but 175 zettabytes of information by 2025 held in the global data sphere. Now, if you compare that to what we were looking at in 2020, that's a fourfold increase in 5 years. We have 463 exabytes of data that's being generated globally every day. And to give you some sense of scale, every word that every human being will ever speak will fit into 5 exabytes. And 75 billion IoT devices flooding the data sphere by 2025, compared to where we are at the moment, which is something in the region of 40. So, the scale with which information is being produced and consumed and analyzed in the world at the moment is enormous. It's only going to get faster. It's only going to get more frantic. And trying to move from data to intelligent, instinctual, intelligent analysis is the challenge that every company seems to be facing today. Oh, I think we're done. Thank you for listening. Come and see us on the stand.